In September 1960, the Central Congo erupts into another major crisis. Masses of Central Congolese riot against the openly communistic strong-arm activities of the government. President Kasavubu, in a face-saving gesture, dismisses Lumumba. But crafty Lumumba, backed and protected by the UN, maintains that he cannot be dismissed and defiantly continues the liquidation of his enemies under the direct protection of the UN. Here, smiling and self-confident, Lumumba shows the reporters the official documents that appointed him premier of the Central Congo government and boasts that he still is and always will be the #1 man in the Congo. He points in triumph to the signatures on the document. The Congolese parliament, riddled with communists, protests Lumumba's dismissal and renders it void. Later, 10 parliament members who voted against Lumumba were shot by Lumumba's police. His authority backed to the limit by UN forces, Lumumba again plunges the Congo into chaos and bloody violence, behind which he makes his final bid for total power. Comrade Lumumba, receiving too much adverse publicity in the eyes of the world to be able to much further the cause of communism in the Congo, was soon to disappear from the scene under mysterious circumstances. March 21, 1961. After Lumumba's mysterious death, President Chambé, on his own initiative and to demonstrate willingness to solve troubles of a plagued Congo, meets with leaders of the central government and of Kasai province to work toward Congo unification and to block communist advance. At this conference, Chambé reiterates that Katanga's succession had taken place primarily to resist the communist dictatorship of Lumumba. But the UN ignores completely the efforts of legitimate Congo leaders to settle the Congo's internal problems and continues to back the communist faction now headed by Gizenga, an acknowledged Soviet agent. Here, Gizenga arrives in Leopoldville to fill the power gap left by Lumumba. Supported by the UN, he declares himself Lumumba's successor and the new premier in the Congo. In this, he was immediately acclaimed and supported by the Soviet bloc nations and the world left-wing press. Gizenga settled for a vice premiership when Adula agreed to follow the Lumumba line. February 21, 1961, the UN Security Council, in disregard of its charter and solemn pledges, authorizes UN troops the use of armed force with the announced purpose of restoring order in the Congo. Disregarding peaceful conditions in Katanga, the United Nations, prodded by the central government, uses this as a pretext to build up its military force in Katanga and pours troops and heavy equipment into the new republic. Although repeatedly warned, the UN commits a tactless breach in international relations when it insists on sending white troop contingents, some of which consider the African a vastly inferior human being. These troops, well trained and equipped with superior late model arms, form the nucleus of UN striking power in the Congo. The UN military buildup in Katanga grinds into high gear as more and more troops begin to arrive. Here, jet bombers manned by Indian pilots are flown into peaceful Katanga to build up UN air power. These jets equipped with rockets, bombs, and machine guns. Here, the Indian pilots are welcomed by the UN commander. All over the Congo, UN officers take stock of their military power. The Russians, operating out of public view, do not send troops, instead send technicians and agents who, penetrating to the top level of the central government, exert Soviet influence. These innocent-looking wooden crates contain Czechoslovakian-made arms and ammunition. Soon the Congo is flooded with communist arms and ammunition. Here, surrounded by the press and feigning complete ignorance of a fact known by every Congolese official, are central government representatives confronted with a sample from a large stockpile of communist munitions in Leopoldville. The symptom of surprise at the discovery exhibited for the benefit of reporters is not very convincing, but the fact remains unchanged. Many of these bullets are designed to kill in Katanga. In Katanga, in the meantime, tension mounts as UN troops, disregarding their agreement with Tshombe's government not to interfere in any way with Katanga's internal affairs, establishes a tight military security and control. As barbed wire barricades, roadblocks, and checkpoints go up, and certain areas are sealed off limits to all Katangese, it becomes increasingly clear that UN forces have established a military law and rule in Katanga which is synonymous with a military occupation of enemy territory. UN troops, in an obvious transgression on civil rights, stop and check cars and civilians, at the same time occupying all strategic junctions within the city. The Katangese population becomes concerned over military restrictions and with interference with their daily business and lives. In Elizabethville, capital of Katanga, which has the strongest concentration of UN forces, the population protests the United Nations interference into their sovereign affairs. They stage a peaceful and orderly demonstration. Here, Katangese citizens, carrying banners which asks for a halt to UN interference, parade the streets of Elizabethville. The demonstration starts to break up when President Tshombe appears to reassure his people and ask them to return to their homes. But the UN, in an abrupt action, takes matters very quickly into their own hands, as heavily armed UN troops and vehicles ruthlessly bear down on the crowd and disperse them at gunpoint. They forcibly clear the streets and impose military curfew on the entire city. The people of Katanga have no choice but to accept the fact that the UN has established a military dictatorship over their country. April 24, 1961. With pressure and tension mounting in Katanga, Tshombe agrees to attend a second meeting of Congolese leaders to implement the agreements reached at the previous conference of March 1961. This meeting, held in the city of Coquilhaville, was under the direct control of the Central Army. In a treacherous move by Kasavubu, Tshombe is stripped of his diplomatic immunity and jailed under brutal conditions until June 22nd. During his imprisonment, the UN command, in flagrant disregard of its agreement, forcibly deports all Katangese civil service workers and army officers of European descent. In defiance, they wave the flag of Katanga. August 8, 1960. Here is the official statement issued by the Security Council. We quote, "The UN forces in the Congo will not be a party to, or in any way intervene in, or be used to influence the outcome in internal conflict, constitutional or otherwise," unquote. Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld went on to make this more explicit. The United Nations force cannot be used on behalf of the central government to subdue or to force the provincial government of Katanga to a specific line of action. September 13th, 1961, and here is how that policy was carried out. UN forces under the command of Connor Cruz O'Brien bring peace by unleashing a vicious and unprovoked assault on Elizabethville. Katangese fighting to preserve their freedom strike back. The superior UN war machine, in a surprise action against ill-equipped Katangese forces, counts on a speedy victory. But the Katangese, white and black alike, rising as one man, put up a fierce resistance that stops the UN invaders in their tracks and finally forces them to retreat. An astonished world hears the news that a superior mechanized UN Legion of War was forced to retreat before a militarily inferior fighting force of determined patriots. But freedom has its price, and Katangese casualties are high and the wounded numerous. To Katangese who lost loved ones in this battle, it may be that the magic words United Nations no longer symbolize universal peace and the brotherhood of man.